Hey guys, this is Paul from Montana, and I just got done rebuilding the engine in this 1996 Yamaha Wave Venture, and I did a three-part video series. If you're wanting to get some help and tips on rebuilding the engine in one of these things, you want to watch the first three videos. I did parts 103, 203, and 303. This last video I'm doing is because I watched all my videos and there was some things that I just didn't feel were very clear. So this last one is to just kind of give you a little bit more information and really clarify some things and try to help you do it. So here it goes. This is the stuff that I forgot. It's going to seem kind of random, but that's because I just kind of wrote it down as I thought of things, you know. I didn't really talk, when I put this engine back together, I didn't really talk much about torque. Torque, obviously, when you torque bolts on an engine is very important. So get a tech spark manual off eBay, and all torque specs are in there for everything that you need to know. And it's particularly important to torque the crankcase and the head and the cylinder head, of course, properly. You need a good torque wrench to do that. That's verified to do what it's supposed to do as far as torque values. Goops, there's a lot of, people, you might rebuild one of these and go, well, what goop do I put on gaskets and what do I put on bolts? Well, there again, get yourself a tech spark manual for this machine. It will tell you everything you need to know about the goops. And for the most part, you don't really put goop on any gaskets because they've got material kind of impregnated in them that's designed to kind of stick the gasket together. I mean, stick the gasket to the mating surface. So that's another reason it's very important to have a very clean mating surface when you work on an engine like this. So very clean mating surface and usually no goop on any gaskets works well. I'm sorry if I'm just kind of pointing the camera. I don't have much to point it at, so we're going to come around here and I'll show you this bar. This is ridiculous. You do not need to make a bar like this. I mean, it doesn't have to look like this, but I welded this bar to hold the flywheel on while I torqued it. It's pretty important to torque your flywheel nut, and it's a pretty big torque. I want to say like 90 foot-pounds or something. So you need to be able to hold it. So this is just something I welded that has the same bolt pattern as that flywheel. And the reason it's so sneaking heavy duty is that's what I had laying around. So you can use that on a diesel engine. The threads on your jet drive, they are regular thread. They are not reverse thread. Talking about the jet drive gear that's back on the back of the crankcase. They are regular thread, so don't crank on it backwards when you're trying to get it off there. A lot of people say it's easier to take that jet drive off before that nut, the jet drive gear off before you disassemble the engine. I didn't do that. I put the crank in a vise with a bunch of rubber around it, like padding, and I was able to get that nut off there by using some heat, and I put a little bit of wax on there too, and it came right off. Installing your engine, it's way easier to take it out, put it back in if this hood is off. So, and I would sure recommend taking the hood assembly off, and when you put the engine, take it out or put it back in, you can simply slide it up where the fuel tank was. I put like a little piece of plywood in there. You can slide it up on that and just bring it out the big hole that's underneath this hood. Very simple. A lot easier than trying to pull it through this hole. Some guys might go, whatever, that's a piece of cake. But I can tell you that not having that hood there was a pretty easy thing. Lining the jet drive, get tech spark manual. There's actually shims underneath this engine that are, keep the engine aligned to the outdrive. Look at the manual and use feeler gauges. It's a pretty big tolerance. So, I mean, it's not that hard to get it in there nice and straight and with the proper gap. Just read your manual. There's a water hose that goes to the exhaust manifold underneath the engine. If you hook that up. If you put the engine in and then hook that hose up underneath there, it's pretty hard to get at that hose clamp and make it a nice, even, tight fit. So I'd probably hook that hose up first to the engine before you install the engine, and then put the engine in and then hook it up back over underneath the carbs where it's easier to get at. I'm sorry I can't show that on this video. It's obviously it's all gone now, but if you're going to rebuild one of these and you tear into it, you'll figure that out. Testing for pop-off pressure. I have all my carburetors set about 40-45. I didn't have to do anything to change that. It was just an OEM setting that repeated and worked great. There's lots of videos on the internet about how to do pop-off pressure, and I just followed some ones that I saw and it worked fine. Testing for compression. Again, there's lots of ways to, there's lots of videos on that you can watch, but I just unhook all the spark plug wires, take one plug out, put the compression tester in there, roll it over for a while until you see the maximum compression. And the compression should be the same between all cylinders, or pretty close to it. If you're off by, I couldn't tell you how many PSI. I would assume if you're off by 5 or 10, there's an issue and you need to address that. These ones are dead nuts. They're right on this fresh rebuild. And it's only going to build compression, I think, as it breaks in. It's not fully broke in yet. And beware, don't just cram a compression tester in there and screw it in and start cranking on it. Make sure that it's not longer than your spark plug threads. You could ruin a piston. I've never done it, but I highly recommend that you don't do that. That's a bad thing. It'll give you a red face for about 2 weeks. Fuel lines. Don't mess around with crappy fuel lines. Go buy some 5.5 millimeter fuel line and just do the whole thing with good, like Honda. I see a lot of Honda 5.5 millimeter inside diameter fuel line available on eBay. Buy the good stuff. You're probably going to need about 15 feet to do this entire machine. Let's see. Okay, I busted the steering on this thing. I caught some air. I'm not a crazy rider, but I did come down really hard, and I actually broke the bolts that hold the steering on. I'd have to guess somebody else has done that somewhere along the line on a machine like this. It's an old machine, so those things happen. Well, you can fix it. And I don't know if you can see in there, but I actually ran bolts clear through. When you take the hood off, you can do this real easily, but you can run bolts all the way through the fiberglass form and bolt your steering on, and it's never gonna give you trouble after that. Use Nylox, stainless steel Nylox. Let's see. Rear compartment for storage. Mine was all cracked and beat up, so I bought a new one. They're available still. Kind of expensive, but man, it's cool to put a brand new one in there. When you're working on your engine and putting it all back together, remove this and remove this. It will give you so much better access to anything that you're trying to work on. You'd be amazed how many times you'll stick your hand through that hole to work on, especially the carburetor assembly. Cleaning parts works real good to clean your parts and your mating surfaces of your engine parts using Scotch-Brite and WD-40. That's just me. Again, I'll throw this out there. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not a professional mechanic, but I have rebuilt some motors and everything has worked out pretty good for me. So, water testing. This is way off base, but you hook your water tester up right here. Your hose up here, and you have an on-off valve. And I'm pretty sure the manual states that you start the engine and then quickly turn the valve on, and let it run. And then when you want to shut it off, you shut the water valve off. Then you shut your engine off. That way, you're not putting a bunch of back pressure in the motor. It's always trying to push it out the back end. Foam replacement on the hood. I put in this really good closed cell foam underneath here. After I took the hood off, I put new foam in there, and it's going to be super awesome watertight. The old stuff was pretty worn out. it's an old machine, so there's lots of things you got to do to really get it dialed in. There's a gauge cluster video I did on that. Click on my name, look for Wave Runner gauge cluster replacement. You'll find that. See, this machine can run without a gauge cluster in it. If you pull it out, it'll run. Everything will function as you think it should. You're just missing sensors and things like that, but it will run. I did it. I removed the oil system from this machine. It's pretty simple to do. I did it with the engine out, but you probably would have to take the fuel tank out of it, and then you remove the the oil pump from the front of the engine, put a cap over it. You can buy a cap set up from SBT for this particular machine, and remove your tank and remove all the hoses, and you're done. Outside the fact that if you have the original gauge cluster in there, it's going to tell you you're out of oil. There's probably a way to wire that. Obviously I don't care because I have the new cluster in there. When you put your cylinder head back on, you've got all your new pistons and rings and everything installed. Putting the cylinder head back on, the cylinder, is kind of tricky. You want to make sure you stagger those pistons as much as you can, so you're feeding one through, then the next one, the next one. If they're all kind of even, it will not work. I guarantee you will not get those pistons back in there. It has to be kind of staggered, unless you got 3 people helping you. But I did it myself, staggered, and it went right back on there. Oil versus dry assembly. The debate goes on and on about that. Do you dry assemble a 2-stroke engine? I don't know. I can't imagine that being a good idea, so I don't do it. I poured some really good full synthetic 2-stroke oil in a bag, and every time I put any kind of parts together that was related to the engine internally, I soaked them in that before I put them together. There again, I'm not a mechanic. That could be the wrong thing to do, but that's what I did. You want to retorque your bolts after you break it in. I would say, I don't know when to do it. I'm just going to go through like 2 tanks of gas, and then I'll go ahead and hit my retorque the bolts, and I'm going to go through a real rigorous break-in process. That's going to consume 2 tanks, 32 to 1. You can see that in one of the other videos I did. What has to come off this engine to get it out? You'll see that in the other videos, but in short, exhaust, carburetors, intake, and exhaust manifold. If you strip it all down to crankcase, cylinder, and cylinder head, the engine will come right out. And you could probably get it through the hole like that. Obviously I did it up to the front. Putting it back in, same story. Put it back in with crankcase, cylinder, and cylinder head assembled. Put your plugs back in so you don't drop something down the hole while you're putting it back in there. This one's kind of dumb, but paddle storage. I have a really cool paddle back here that I keep underneath that muffler bungee. Expands out. Availability of parts for this machine, like the exterior parts, this 23-year-old machine. So the outside of it it's kind of hard to find stuff that you need that's not used. Engine parts, on the other hand, very, very, very simple to get parts for that motor. Yamaha must put it in everything, snowmobiles and everything. I found that to be very easy. Last year I rebuilt an old Honda XR500, 1984 XR500. I restored this thing basically to try to get it to showroom condition. Very hard to find parts. It was not fun. I don't think I would pick that project ever again, but these machines, yeah, you can still get parts for them. When you take your crank out, you've got it tore down as far as it'll go. Take your crank out, inspect it really, really well. Thrust washers, make sure all the thrust washers are on there, 6 of them. Make sure your rods aren't loose, and make sure your bearings aren't screwed up. If they are, get a rebuilt crank and stick it in there. Don't mess around with that. You're gonna be sorry if you put a bad crank in and run your machine and it blows up in 3 months. So that's about all I have for you. I hope that helps, and if you take on this project of rebuilding this machine, I wish you luck. Thanks.